Hi, welcome to the third in our series of videos on how VCE works. This one is on probably the most controversial topic of all, which is subject scaling. Um, so in our last video, we chose a school, and we realized that it really doesn't matter what school you go to. Your SAC scores will all sort of come out in the wash. Now we're going to choose some subjects. So we've got to imagine that we're looking at different subjects that we might do, some of them we might like, some of them we might think we're good at. But one consideration we might have, potentially, is how they're scaled. Okay, so let's imagine we're a student who has no interest in life. All they're interested in is maximizing their ATAR. What sort of choices would that student make? Hard to imagine at this school, I know. So you've got a few possible strategies. You could pick all the easiest subjects. You could pick the ones where you think you're going to get sort of 90% in every SAC or whatever it might be. Um, you could pick the subjects that you're relatively best at, the subjects that you've sort of done traditionally well at over the years at school compared to other subjects. You could pick the subjects with the highest scaling, and that'll be kind of the focus of this video here. And lastly, you could pick a LOTE, which seems like a strange one, but there is actually a little bit of a bonus for picking a LOTE. So I hope I'm not spoiling things when I say the main outcome of this video will be that it really doesn't matter what subjects you choose in terms of scaling, but there is a little bit of an advantage to doing LOTE. So if you think you might be good at a LOTE, then there is actually a slight advantage there. Speaking of LOTEs, we might do a little case study. If we look at Hebrew, a 25 in Hebrew is worth a 40 after scaling. A 30, so the middle score in Hebrew, is a 45 after scaling. 35 goes to 49 and a 40 goes to 51, and you can imagine what a 45 and a 50 go to. And you might think, is that because Hebrew is really, really hard? Is Hebrew just really hard to learn? Or as Hebrew people might say, that? Or is it the VCAA's little reward for doing Hebrew? Do they really want more Hebrew speakers in Victoria? And there's a desperate shortage of Hebrew speakers, so what they do is they really want to encourage people to do Hebrew. Well, that seems kind of ridiculous. And you might think at first, oh, well, it's just the LOTE bonus, isn't it? But no, Hebrew goes up by more than French and more than Chinese, and I think possibly even more than Latin. So it's not just the LOTE bonus. There's actually something in there where Hebrew is going up by more than everything else. You can imagine specialist maths is in this boat as well, and so is Latin. There's a few subjects that really scale up an enormous amount. So you might think, well, does the VCAA really want to encourage people to do these subjects? And the short answer is no. That's John Firth from the VCAA, and he seems like a lovely guy. You can see he's smiling in that photo, but I promise you he does not care whether you do Hebrew or not. In fact, he doesn't care what subjects you choose. His job, in fact, the job of the whole VC or VTAC system, ATAR system, is actually kind of premised around the idea of not caring what subjects you do, but yet still being able to produce a single number. So the philosophy of subject scaling is a little bit strange, but it's basically based on this idea that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what subjects you choose, and that's actually the whole point of scaling. We've got it completely the wrong way around if we imagine that scaling is a reason to choose a subject, because the whole point of scaling is to make it so that it doesn't matter what subjects you choose. Probably the best way to think of subject scaling is not as a reward for doing a hard subject, but actually compensation for doing a hard subject. Sort of a bit of triage for how badly you're going to do. And you're not going to do badly because the subject is hard and you're not capable of it, but just because the people you're competing against makes it that much harder to get, say, a 30. A 30, remember, is the middle score in a subject. And if everyone else in the subject is a really good mathematician, then that just makes it that much harder to get to be the middle student. So think of scaling not as a reward, think of it as compensation, because you are going to get a lower raw score in those subjects. But ultimately it doesn't matter because scaling sorts it out for you. So don't worry about it. The idea of scaling, how it kind of works conceptually, is to say, all right, let's suppose you get a 35 in chemistry. It's then to say, okay, well, what would that same student have got if they'd done, say, psychology instead? It's a counterfactual idea. Right, and I want you to really sort of get that in your head. I'm going to pause here for a moment so you can really think about that. How would you make a comparison there between the world in which you do chemistry and you get 35 and the world in which you didn't and instead you chose to do psychology? What is that chemistry 35 really worth? And what did they give up by doing chemistry and not something else? Not psychology, not drama, not politics, not specialist maths, not whatever else they might have done. That's what subject scaling is here to do. It's here to solve that problem. Okay, so I like to think of this like an incredibly out-of-date movie reference to the film Sliding Doors. I think this came out in 1997. I was 12 at the time. It was a romantic comedy, so I didn't see it, but I have seen it since. And in this movie, Gwyneth Paltrow misses a train. Or does she? A different version of her just steps on the train. And one version of her gets home and busts her boyfriend cheating on her. And the other lives on in ignorance. And then the movie is about these two different Gwyneths going through life. And one of them meets John Hannah. And she's really happy, and the other one's miserable with this other boyfriend who's cheating on her. But eventually, they end up in the same place. Eventually, they both meet John Hannah, and they both live happily ever after. That's the idea of subject scaling. There's a world in which you do chemistry, and there's a world in which you do psychology, and in the end, it doesn't matter which one you choose, you end up with the same score. Okay, so after scaling, you should get the same score regardless of what subject you choose, even if you get radically different raw scores in those two subjects. Alright, so you might imagine a scenario, a student who is thinking of doing 3 different subjects. They're not sure. Oh, I don't know, maybe I'll do food tech, maybe I'll do ancient history, maybe I'll do chemistry. This is a person with really wide interests. Then we could sort of play the movie forwards. We could split that person into 3 realities and have them go forward and do the VCE, and they get 42 in food tech and 38 in ancient history and 33 in chemistry. It's because the students they're competing against in those subjects are different cohorts. But after scaling, they get 37 in all of them. Now, of course, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. Obviously, your talents aren't exactly the same in those 3 subjects. But this is on average what you can expect. Okay, so how does that work? How exactly do they do it? Well, what they do is they take advantage of the fact that there are so many students in Victoria. There are 60,000 Year 12s this year. And each of them is doing more than one subject. So you have the same person doing accounting and English and chemistry and physics, say. And so you can make comparisons between that person's score in the 4 subjects that they do. So let's see what that looks like. Right. So imagine a world in which there's just 2 subjects that you're choosing from. You've got PE and you've got history revolutions. We take advantage of the fact that there is a whole bunch of students who do both of those subjects. Right? And among those students who do both PE and history, we find that those students on average get 29 in history and 31 in PE. But they're the same students. They have the same average ability. So by definition, that means it's a little bit harder to get a 30 in history than it is in PE. So what we do is we bump history up by 1, we bump PE down by 1. We make it so that those students who did both get the same scaled score in both, on average. And then we can do this across other subjects. We could do English and phys ed. And we could do English and legal studies. And we could do legal studies and drama, and we could do hospitality and health, and we could do media and physics, and we could do literature and music. We could do philosophy and viscom, we could do global politics and psychology, we could do English language and texts and traditions, and we could do art and enviro, and we could do theatre and biology, we could do economics and VET equine studies. And in each one, we just look at all those students who are doing both subjects. In this case, probably not that many. We look at what average they're getting in each of those subjects, and we shift things so that after scaling, they come out the same. So we get the true value of each study score in each subject versus the same students' scores that they're getting in every other subject that they do. So, by definition, not just an attempt by the VCE, but by definition, on average, you get the same score regardless of subject choices. Now, I know that's kind of hard to get your head around. You might need to go back and watch that a couple of times. And I know some of you still won't believe me after this. But it really is the case that on average, you get the same score no matter what subjects you choose.